apologise. If I knew I had guests, I would have been better prepared. Were you really just watching this time-lapse all by yourself? Oh, well, I'm flattered. Since you seem to have interest, I would happily walk you through the process of what I was thinking as I was creating this piece. Would you like that? Yeah? Perfect. I know I'm a little late to the party, but I'll just pick up where we are now and try and make up for it, alright? So here, as you can see, I decided to make this model from scratch because due to his multiple arms, I felt this character might have unique anatomy when I was finished with the sculpting process. I always find I spend a lot of time in this stage shaping out the torso, getting the proportions right, because I find I like to get it right off the bat so I don't have to come back and adjust it too much later on, because it becomes much more difficult when you start adding in more detail. Now, as you can see, I've made the basic shape for the arms as well. The most important tip I had learned when I was first learning how to sculpt the anatomy for the human arm was to imagine it like a chain linking together, with the bicep and tricep creating one link and then the forearm muscles almost like a link latching onto that in the same way a chain would. And I was amazed to realize how accurate the description was for creating the basis of the human arm. I didn't put very much effort into making his legs for a few various reasons. I knew the shot would be mostly of the character's upper body and his legs would be obscured by the shopping cart. The hands I did not create especially for this piece. I often don't, because I find it takes a lot of time just to get the basic shape of a hand. So I often will bring in a pair I've already made from one of my previous models, and that is what I've done here. Of course, it always requires a bit of reshaping to get it just right, but it's much faster than making it again from scratch. Always reuse where you can, because your time is valuable. Unfortunately, some footage was lost, but as you can see here, I've done a bit more detailing on the torso and head of the character. And now it's time to start duplicating his arms. It was a tricky process deciding specifically how I was going to do this. I split off his arms from the base mesh and then duplicated them to make 2 more sets on his lower torso and back. All 3 pairs need slight variations in the way they're detailed too. And now is when right now is when I add in that extra bit of detail. Yeah, look at that. Detailing arms is tricky. There's so many different interlocking and interlacing muscles and joints. It's deceptively hard, so don't beat yourself up if you're struggling. Just keep on practicing, keep on practicing. I merge them back onto the body, and then to make sure all of them are one mesh, I use Dynamesh at a really high resolution. But obviously now the problem is the model. Way too high poly to be used for anything, so I just zero mesh at half over and over again. I like to zero mesh half and then half and then half and then straight down to 1000 because I feel like that preserves detail a little bit better. And now I can properly start detailing the areas and the joints around where his arms connect to his body. I had to get a little bit creative here because the lower arms don't have any shoulders above them, so I had to try and figure out what kind of muscles would exist inside of this person, what would make it possible to connect those body parts. Now I'm creating a mask which I will then use to create his shirt. A nice v-neck collar. Of course I'm using reference. Retail workers, the way they dress, the type of clothes that they wear. Naturally that was the reference I used. Very important to use reference in your artwork. When not your memory is very likely not perfect, and there's nothing wrong with a little bit of reference. Just making sure there's no bit jutting out and everything's clean and organised. After I organise it, I'm planning on taking the slow poly model into Blender so I can create the collar for the shirt as well, which I believe is what I do right here. Yes, there you go. I've created a nice collar. I repeated a very similar process for the pants. And now I went through a couple different ideas and concepts for the design of the character's face. I didn't quite know whether I wanted him to appear scary or friendly or uncanny or somewhere in between, but in the end I finally decided to go with something that looked quite human but a little bit more perfect. A little bit like from that one commercial, what was it? Mr. Clean? Yes, something along those lines is what I decided to go with. Unfortunately, I had a crash in ZBrush and missed out on the beginnings of how I started detailing the wrinkles and the creases in the clothes. But as you can see here, I've managed to get a bit of that footage recovered, and this is kind of the gist of what it looked like. See, on the pants though, we got much more in depth, and you can really see the process I went through here. I have some special alphas I actually made myself, which I use, as you can see right here, I used to create seams in clothes. Handmade alphas, it's a very valuable tool to have, and I recommend checking out, trying to find some tutorials on YouTube to make your own. I did the same on the shirt here, just make it look a little bit more real, with creases coming in handy as always, and you can see here, just a quick run through of the process from beginning to end. Now we're in Blender, for real. To finish up the process, do a little bit of modeling stuff that I find is a lot easier to do in Blender than in ZBrush. I'm creating the straps on the belt. The straps on the pants so that the belt will then go through. And yes, that's right, I have yet to create the belt, but here we go, I'm doing that right now. It was quite easy, just duplicating a loop from the top of the pants and then using a solidify modifier to give it some thickness. There was a bit of issue, but I managed to sort that out, and then it's just a couple of issues I just had to sort out there, and I had to create the overlap, as all belts do, because it goes through itself, and then using the inset tool, and the loop tools, using the inset tool and the loop tools add-on for Blender, I created the holes on the belt that the buckle goes through. Next I made a plane, and I realized I needed to turn this plane into a wireframe type. So I tried using the wireframe modifier, but it wasn't quite giving me the result I wanted, so I decided to think outside the box. I recreated the plane just using the vertices, and then turned it into a curve, and then used the extrude bevel to make it a rounded shape before converting it back into a mesh. Then using another cylinder, I created the part of the buckle that goes through the holes, and like that, a little bit more cleanup, the belt is nice and ready to wear. I like to believe that this is a really fancy gentleman, and he wears a really fancy belt to work, even though he only works as a retail worker. That doesn't mean he can't afford to splurge out a little bit. To make the belt a little bit more interesting, I also brought it into ZBrush to just detail around the edges and make it look a little bit more worn and a little bit more interesting on the eye. Nothing wrong with that. It's always fun, I find, working on clothes. Putting wrinkles and creases into clothes is one of my favorite things to do in the character creation process. You can see here using my handmade crease brush once again to add some more details around the edge. I realized something had gone wrong with the pants, and I had to redo the details, so you're really getting a good look at how I detail my clothes. Then I also decided now is a good time to detail his eyelids, sorry. I realized I hadn't done that. Here's a good look at the final result for the face and some final extra details, make him look a bit more lively. And now we're back into Blender, and even though the topology of this character isn't great, I decided I'd make him a rig, because he's not being animated, I just needed one for a quick pose. I use the Rigify modifier for all of my rigs, because I'm lazy. The base human meta rig is a normal human who only has 2 arms, so I had to duplicate the arm bones and rearrange them for the extra 2 arms. Ah yes, this next part is possibly what was the most tedious part of this whole process of creating this piece. I had to basically stock an entire aisle of a grocery store. Do you know how insane that is? And you might think, oh, it's easier, you're doing it in 3D, and while there are some shortcuts, I believe it still took a few hours, in fact almost as long as the entire creation of the character. That's partially due to the fact that I had to model and texture all these different products, as well as duplicating them and filling out the shelves. Of course I needed to make sure I had enough products, that there was enough variation to make it look more believable. But there was quite a few spots where I just duplicated the same product, and I knew that it wouldn't be too noticeable from the angle of the camera. And another little secret, the shelves in the very back were just PNGs of grocery shelves from stores I got online. Remember, Don't do any unnecessary work that's not going to add anything to your project. Here I might just wait a minute because it's just the same thing for a little while. You know, rinse and repeat, stock, duplicate, and move the product, and I'll be back. Next up, I was on to the posing of the character. This was actually quite fun, figuring out what I wanted all of his individual arms to do, you know, moving them around and making it look like he was taking stuff out of the cart and putting it on the shelves. And in my mind I'd had an idea, he only really uses his extra long back arms to put the stuff on the shelves, because they're the longest and they can reach the high or low without him having to move. His two small arms he just uses for pushing the cart, so he can hold on to it and move without having to worry too much. And then his two other arms are kind of the in-between. They're taking stuff out of the cart and passing to his bigger arms. Next up was the lighting, and this piece was very vibe heavy, I like to call it, so getting the lighting right was very important. In fact, I did it before even texturing the character, as you can see. I wanted to make it look like it was, you know, late at night, and the store was closed, and it was just this man stocking up the shelves for the next day of business. One moment. Of course I have a nice cup of Earl Grey tea. Anyway, here you can see I just did some light colouring, because when you make skin it's nice. You have to do a little bit of colour variation using red, blue and yellow is the most commonly used. And then just texturing up his clothes. I wanted to make it look like something like IKEA at first, but I kind of changed my mind and went for this more dull red and brown look. I was quite happy with it though. It made it seem like some grocery store might have their employees dressed in such clothing. I used booleans to make buttons, just to add a little bit more extra detail to his clothes, because of course a shirt like this would have buttons. And then just making sure everything's looking neat and textured and tidy. Leathery for the belt, of course, and then more fabric for the pants. Then just making sure I'm happy with the lighting. It's very important to get the lighting just right on this one, and I believe I like to think I did a good job. The compositing again was important to get right, and I felt like that last little bit, the color correction, was to give it a more otherworldly feel. You know, when you give something a more of a monochrome look by cranking either the red, green or blue, you can really get a nice looking vibe. And that's about it. Here's the final result. I'm so grateful you stayed all the way through to the end of this video, and I hope you learned something or just enjoyed your time with me today. Anyway, that's all. Goodbye for now.